Good morning, everybody. Yes, good to see half the people here for the second day. So obviously everybody enjoyed the party last night. But well done for you guys for making it in. Thank you. My presentation is probably a little bit different to some of the DevOps presentations we had yesterday, which were all really good, because I'm focusing a little bit more on the why of DevOps. And we had some really good presentations yesterday, people talking about the DevOps journey, the DevOps transformation, you know, and the how and the what they did to move to DevOps. What I'm trying to do with this talk is position arguments that you can take back to your boss as to why he thinks he should be looking at DevOps and how DevOps should be affecting the business. So why are organizations looking at DevOps? I think one of the best quotes came from the MBank session yesterday when they were asked, how did you convince your boss to adopt a DevOps approach? And the answer came back was, because production was falling apart, which I just thought was excellent. You know, if you're going to try and change management program, if you've got what they call a burning platform like that, both in the physical or the technological sense of the word platform, it's a lot easier to get change. But most of us don't really have that situation. However, 2 years ago in the Harvard Business Review, there was a really interesting article by a guy named John Kotter. He's a management theorist who has been writing about management for like 30 years. If you were going to study a business degree, you know, studying Kotter's models and Kotter's principles would be a core part of any sort of MBA or business degree. And what he said in this article, which was titled Accelerate, and he said that these hierarchical structures and organizational processes we've used for decades to improve our enterprises are no longer up to the task of winning in a fast-moving world. And I found this really fascinating because here's a key management theorist who's basically saying everything that I've been telling you for the past 30 years is wrong because the world has changed, the industry has changed. You know, everything that we're doing now is too fast for the old ways of doing it. And I think this speaks really to the heart of what DevOps is all about. Because the processes that we're used to, so you know, ITIL, Prince2, the very siloed ways of working, are all, you know, fantastic ways for chewing up huge amounts of time and not actually achieving very much. But we need to find different ways. So we're all kind of familiar with this concept of, you know, a continuous delivery pipeline. As we move from left to right, you know, we plan what we're going to do, we code it, we stick it on a build server, you know, we do some integration testing, we plan a release, we deploy it, and then we operate it out in production. Every time I go to our clients, one of the first things they said, we ask them, why are you here and what's your problem? And universally, the number one thing they say is, we can't get stuff quick enough for the business. It takes us too long. By the time, I mean, direct quote from a customer, you know, by the time we deliver this new piece of software, this new piece of functionality, this new piece of code, the business have forgotten what they wanted it for. You know, that was the lag between the reality. So if you think about that, if it's taking you 6 or 12 months to deliver what the business wants, and by the time you deliver it, they've forgotten what you wanted, every single, you know, pound or euro or zloty or whatever that you spent on that project was a complete and utter waste of time. Okay, you might as well have just put, you know, 50,000 or 100,000 euros in the middle of the table and set fire to it. It's a complete waste of time. So we're trying to reduce the cycle time. We're trying to get from the idea through to the, you know, the business value. If you ever read the book by Tom and Mary Popendiek on lean software development, they use the phrase from concept to cash. That's what DevOps is all about. We're trying to, you know, move it faster along the software development lifecycle. Okay, so why are companies so obsessed with doing things quickly? So we're on the second why of our kind of 5 whys troubleshooting analysis. Well, if we go back to 1960, the average company lasted about 60 years. Predominantly, they were industrial companies, they were manufacturing companies, they were companies that had, you know, high capex, you know, big firms, they were building stuff, okay? And they lasted about 60 years. Fast forward to 2015, and the average company is lasting 20 years. So if you're trying to grow a business, you're trying to make a profit, you're trying to be successful, you've only got a third of the amount of time to be successful. So unsurprisingly, once we move to a sort of a shareholder value world, investors want to get their money in, they want to see it happen, they want to get it out. If any of you have worked in startups and have spoken to venture capital firms, you'll generally find that a normal VC fund, he wants his money back in 5 to 7 years at most. So you don't even have 20 years to sort of build and grow your company successful. They want you to be successful and get your money back and out in 5 to 7 years. So why is it that these companies aren't lasting? Why is it that that we've gone from this 60 years down to 20 years? So the third why, sort of hyper competition, and I think it's really, really key if you're looking at sort of the modern industry is that the reduced barriers to entry. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche in the startup world or the e-commerce world that some guy in his basement or in his bedroom, if he's got a good website, he can run an e-commerce website that looks just as good as the big boys or any other kind of website that you might run from your basement or your bedroom. Because the internet and cloud have leveled the playing field. So that increases the amount of competition. Suddenly I don't need huge amounts of money to get into the market. All I need is an off-the-shelf e-commerce platform, an off-the-shelf content management system, put it together with a good idea and get it out into EC2. I've reduced the barriers to entry. And along with that is the switch from CapEx to OpEx. I don't need to have huge amounts of cash anymore. I can start, we started DevOps Guys, my business partner and I, we started DevOps Guys with, £500 each, and we turned over 1.2 million last year in 18 months. So we've gone from, putting in literally transferring 500 to turnover of 1.2 million in 18 months. So it's very possible to very rapidly grow a business with a very, very small amount of capital. That said, get as much capital as you can, because when you're trying to run a small business and you've got no capital, it's really hard. So, I would still say get as much capital as you possibly can. So beg and borrow and steal money from your family and friends. The other thing which is probably the most important thing for the increasing competition and creating of this hyper-competition, a hyper-competitive world, is the reduction in information asymmetry. Now, this is sort of a term economists use, but it's really, really simple. These days, you know what the price of something is. If I go into a store, these days I go into, John Lewis, big department store on Oxford Street, I'll see people walking around the store and they've got their phone out and they're scanning stuff and they're searching for stuff and they're going and looking on Google Shopper and they're finding out what the price is. So in the past, where John Lewis might have been able to charge a really premium price for what they're selling, they can't anymore. Because somebody knows within a fraction of a second, because of an app on their mobile phone, what the real price of that thing is. I can get it somewhere else cheaper, and it might be physically walking down the road to get it cheaper, or I can get it cheaper online. And, we see now that, the huge rise of sort of price comparison engines, shopping comparison engines, you know roughly what the price it is. And so the information asymmetry between what the vendor knows what the price is, what it cost him and what he's trying to sell it for, between you knowing what the sale price is, puts a lot more power in the hands of the consumer. So therefore, it is even a more and more competitive world. So what's sort of driving this hyper competition and this information asymmetry? What's the next why in our 5 whys? Well, the next why, to be honest, is consumer behavior. Because of this guy who invented this, we now have all these amazing applications that are bombarding us with information. And I really honestly believe that consumer behavior has changed as a result of the smartphone. Because of that reduction in information asymmetry and just this demand for information, people want it now. Now, when I started in the industry over 25 years ago, email was sort of just being introduced. And we were stunned that I could write a message and have it sent to somebody in the other part of the world. I was in Perth in Western Australia, and I was communicating with an IBM lab in Raleigh, North Carolina. And and even in those days, mail wasn't reliable. Mail still got lost. I sent you that email, did you not get it? Oh, well, I can't remember, the modem didn't hang up properly, blah, 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 blah. Now, if we take in my lifetime, I've gone from being amazed that an email got delivered at all, to at the far end of this, we've got, you know, Snapchat, that I'm sending a message that when you receive it, it's only going to last 10 seconds and it's going to automatically delete it yourself. So if you think about that change in behavior from consumers being so sure a message is going to be delivered, they're wanting it so fast, and the selling point of Snapchat is the fact that the message only lasts 10 seconds. That's a massive change in behavior. It's gone from being just absolutely happy that it be delivered at all, through to actually, I'm so sure it's going to be delivered, and I only want it to last 10 seconds because I've sent you a picture of something that should only last 10 seconds, and it's just going to go away, and everybody's happy about that. So again, really, really big shift in consumer behavior. And related to that is this idea of consumer rates of adoption. So this is a graph, shows you a curve of sort of the different rates of adoptions from, you know, telephones, electricity, refrigeration, clothes washers, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at the rate of adoption sort of roughly of electricity, you know, it took from 1910 to like 1960 for sort of electricity kind of to be rolled out. If we look at the rate of adoption of something like cell phones, you know, it took 10 years to get the same level of penetration. Now, obviously, you know, electricity comes with a whole lot more infrastructure and stuff, but you know, this concept that consumer rates of adoption are just so much faster. The market penetration to get to that 90% now, I mean, the curve is literally nearly vertical. So again, consumers are being driven much, much faster, or the demand and the hyper competition is being driven by these consumer rates of adoption. And along with that, we have all these fantastic technology enablers. You know, we have all of the Amazon Web Servers, we have all our configuration management tools, we have amazing APM tools, we've got Jenkins and TeamCity, we've got Selenium automation, we've got you know, GitHub and Stash and all the Atlassian tools, we've got Slack for doing all our chat. You know, we've got these amazing technology enablers that enable us as an IT organization to go faster and faster and faster. So, you know, we're being driven and being pushed by our consumers. The businesses are scared, they don't have enough time. We've got all this great technology that enables us to do things. I mean, you know, I think it's really interesting for me, again, having come from a background of sort of being the guy who used to stick the disk, you know, literally physical disk, even before CDs, to build a server. And now we've got an entire, I think we're building an entire generation of systems administrators who have never actually installed an operating system. And they never will. Because why would they? Why do you need to install an operating system anymore? I just take a cloud image. So all that time we spent learning to install operating systems is now a complete waste of time. I'll just take a cloud image and I'll configure it with Ansible and job done. So I'll never install an operating system again. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. It's an interesting question. So what's the answer? In that same article, Mr. Cotter again, you know, and I just need to re-emphasize, this is a business article in the Harvard Business Review, probably, you know, one of the most preeminent management journals in the world. And this guy, you know, who's been doing this stuff for 30 years, look at the language that he's using. It's a second operating system. And it uses agile, network-like, different set of processes, agility, speed, creativity. He's using our language. You know, he is using the language of technology. He is using the language of software development. He's using the language of IT. So this guy is clearly cribbing from our crib sheet, which is great because we've got this guy who's sending this message to the business, sending this business to management that we need this second operating system, you know, that enables us to do this in a more agile way. It's a good article. There's a link down the bottom of the article. I suggest you read it. But for me, I see DevOps as being the kernel of the second operating system that he's referring to. I think that DevOps is not the entire answer. Maybe if you called it biz, dev, test, ops, it would be the entire answer. I think it's part of the solution. I think it's part of the solution on a continuum of different things that organizations need to do to change. If any of you have been following what's been happening with Zappos in the US, with this transition to a style of running the business called holacracy, again, that's a really, really interesting idea. It's about how do we change the entire way the business runs, how do we move away from very rigid hierarchical management structures to the kind of network-like structures that he was referring to here. There are a number of evolving models on how that we can do that. So if DevOps is the kernel of this second operating system that we're trying to build, and we've got this concept that software is a digital asset. It's an asset of the organization that you're building and that has value. And then we start to think of DevOps as building the digital supply chain that takes us from this idea from concept to cash, from this idea that we had through to actually delivering, business value. I'm turning a digital asset into business value. Okay? And this is the kind of language that you're going to need to understand and you're going to need to be able to talk if you're going to get past those silos that you guys operate in at the moment or in many organizations, and I've spent most of my life operating inside those silos as well. If you're going to get the ear of not just the CIO or the CTO, but the CEO, and more importantly, what in US terms the CFO, called the finance director, in UK terms, the guy who controls the money, you've got to be able to speak this language. So I'm going to build my continuous delivery pipeline. I'm going to go through my build process. I'm going to test it. I'm going to automate it. And I'm going to get it out into production. That's what we're trying to do with DevOps in conjunction with all of the other elements of DevOps that I'll talk about in a minute. So software is a digital asset. Okay, but I think we need to understand that assets can also depreciate. So if you were thinking about software DevOps as building this digital supply chain, does anybody sort of come from a retail background here or work in a retail organization that has a large logistics or warehouse thing? If you've ever worked in a retail environment, you would know that there is a whole philosophy of supply chain management, and all they care about is getting stuff in from inventory from their suppliers out into the stores and sold as quickly as possible. There's a whole number of algorithms and equations that talk about stock keeping time and how all your assets are depreciating while they're held in inventory. So if you think about your Nexus or Artifactory as being your warehouse of all that stuff that's sat in there that is not deployed into the production environment is just costing you money. It's just wasting you money that you've spent building it. Every feature that you build that doesn't get deployed, every feature that you build that gets deployed that doesn't get used is wasting you money. So the whole purpose of our digital supply chain is to get it into the hands of our customers. They can use it. We can start generating value as fast as possible, but keeping in mind we've got to do it safely and securely, and we've got to measure up with all the compliance and all those other kind of things that we need. So I feel the need, the need for speed. I want to get this out fast. So the question is, what does fast actually look like? So this was actually taken from, I run a user group in London on web performance, and this was actually taken from a presentation that some guys from Dynatrace, I think, did. And so cars.com, US website, they do about 300 deployments a year. So, about a deployment a day. That's pretty good. I mean, many organizations I've worked at struggle to do a deployment a month. A deployment every 3 months, massive big batch sizes. Flickr does about 10 deployments a day. Etsy does about 50 to 60 deployments a day. This is all taken from public available information, largely from lectures at VelocityConf. But anybody want to guess what the number of deployments is for Amazon.com? Sorry? Correct. Every 11.6 seconds. Damn it, you've seen this presentation before. So, if you think about that, so I mean, obviously, this feature, stat's a little bit odd, but I mean, you think about the size of the Amazon estate from AWS through to, and EC2 through to, the Amazon bookstore. They've got a massive number of services and a massive number of developers, but every 11.6 seconds, we as operations people, we can't be sitting down and having a weekly CAB meeting with the change manager and going through what changes we want to put into the release if we're going to be releasing every 11.6 seconds. Imagine the list of changes you'd have to review in your weekly change review meeting if you were doing it, one for every 11.6 seconds for the next week. So, the models and a lot of the ways that we've been working traditionally in this siloed model, they just can't work. So if we come back to this analogy of us as building these digital supply chains, again, in a physical warehouse, a physical factory, there is an idea called process engineering. So as a process engineer, your job is to build the supply chain that takes the raw material to build this widget. And at the end of an assembly line, I have this widget and I can put it in a box and ship it and I can sell it. And a process engineer needs to ensure that all of the machines, they do their task well, they're reliable, and they're transforming this item at every step of the way with an acceptable level of quality, with tolerance built in, with automated testing built in. If you've ever been to a modern car factory and you see a car actually being scanned with a laser, you know, in three-dimensional laser scanning because they're assessing the quality. It's very similar to what we're trying to do. We're trying to build in unit testing. We're trying to build in, you know, acceptance testing, you know, Gherkin syntax, all that sort of stuff. We're trying to build in Selenium browser testing for web apps. So our role is very much moving towards being like this process engineer who's building this continuous delivery pipeline. So how can the CALMS model or DevOps traditionally help you make you go faster? So is everybody familiar with the CALMS model? You've all kind of seen that before. CALMS model of DevOps, culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing. Everybody, anybody not familiar with the CALMS model? Put your hand up. No? Okay, most of you have sort of seen it. Okay, so culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing, proposed by Damon and Jez, and there's an article on IT Revolution from John Willis, Bocciagalupe, where he talks about how they came up with this CALMS model and how lean got, it was originally just CAMS, and then lean got shoved in. But really sort of talking about, when you're talking about your DevOps transformation, you know, you need to look at these kind of 5 areas as broad groupings. So culture is all about the way things are done in sort of your organization, the kind of relationships between management and the people who are doing stuff. And it's all about, you know, having an attitude that embraces change. I think there's a guy over there who's got a great t-shirt on that says, "Make mistakes." So, you know, make mistakes would be, stand up quick. There's a, you know, make mistakes is a great cultural trait. Different organizations have a different attitude towards failure. So, you know, that's a cultural thing. Automation is the core DevOps stuff. Many people, when they come to us and say we want DevOps, they only mean they want the A. They want the A in the CALMS model. They're not really interested in doing any of the other things. And as to us, we go, great, we can automate it. We can make your deployment. We can make your infrastructure as code. We can do all that, and it's really, really fast. If you're still doing massive projects that only deliver once every 6 months, that might help you and might help you spin up test environments, but it's not really getting stuff into the hands of your customers faster. Okay, so measurement sharing. So let's take one of these. I think one of the key things for me, Stephen Covey, the guy who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has this great talk about high trust and low trust cultures. And, you know, again, if I think about sort of the traditional Prince to ITIL, I'm going to have people, I'm going to check up, I'm going to hover. It's all about, you know, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, you know. That's a low trust culture. On the other end, I've got a high trust culture where people are, you know, it's a bit more like Scrum. Team starts to take responsibility. Team starts to take ownership. We extend that into a DevOps model. You know, you're being asked, you've committed as a team to say, we're going to deliver X by time Y, and the arrangement is, as long as you give us the resources we need and the decisions that we need, we'll give you the software that you need. That's the difference between a low trust culture and a high trust culture. You know, the criteria are clear and the consequences are set. So what does that mean in terms of performance? Well, you know, the blame game. I mean, who's worked in organizations where, you know, the amount of time you've wasted either protecting your ass so you don't get the blame, or when something bad has happened, you next spend the next 3 weeks in meetings trying to apportion the blame. You know, it's just such a common thing. Wasting huge amounts of time apportioning the blame. If I have a high trust culture, I'm not going to do this blame game. I'm not going to waste time pointing fingers. So, you know, we try and avoid that. So on a different area, there's a really, really interesting piece of research from Microsoft about the influence of organizational structure on software quality. So what they're really saying in these two slides is they looked at a number of metrics about the way their IT organization that was building, it was actually building Windows XP, this dates back to 2008, and they looked at the number of bugs across the different teams, the different DLLs, the different components of XP, and they looked at the organizational structure that was surrounding that team or that part of the application and that part of the bugs. And basically what they came up with was that organizational structure, the gaps between management and staff, the gaps between how wide it spread between the sort of different parts of the dev teams in that kind of organizational hierarchy and tree, was a better predictor of bugs in the code than the number of changes, code churn, than the code complexity, so like calculating a cyclometric complexity score that you can get from a static code analysis tool, the number of dependencies in the code, the amount of code coverage they had with the tests, and the number of pre-release bugs versus the number of actual bugs they found in production. This was all based on bugs they found in production. So if people say that culture is not important and culture doesn't affect software quality, well, here's an exact thing to say. It was a better predictor. How your teams were arranged, how information flowed across your organization was a better predictor of code quality than some technical metric like cyclometric complexity. So culture and the way you're organized, Conway's law is another area, if you've ever heard of Conway's law, that talks about how teams are organized. If you have a 3-team or 4-block team, you'll have a 4-pass compiler. Well worth having a look at Conway's law as well. So automation, is the obvious low-hanging fruit of DevOps. We're going to build this same slide as you saw before. We're going to build these continuous delivery pipelines. We're going to automate everything. We're going to speed everything up. It's a real no-brainer that we're going to be able to, improve the speed of delivery and reduce the cycle time through using automation. That said, you need to understand what your point of constraint is, which leads us very, very nicely into the idea of lean. All of the work with lean is about identifying constraints. It's about finding that bottleneck, elevating the bottleneck. So again, theory of constraints: elevate the bottleneck, resolve it, find the next one, subordinate everything to that bottleneck. So one of the really, really interesting things about the approaching this lean idea, and in most of the organizations that we deal with, the biggest blocker that we have to the adoption of DevOps is the finance director or the CFO, the guy who controls the money. He wants to have a project. They're obsessed with this idea of projects. I want to specify everything up front. I want to guesstimate out a value. I want to assign a cost, and then I want to calculate an ROI, and then I'll make a decision about whether you're allowed to actually do that or not. And there's some really, really good stuff on this hashtag of sort of beyond projects and no projects, if you haven't looked. Predominantly led by a guy in the UK named Alan Kelly. Well worth having a read of that stuff. I very strongly believe that the project model is a cancer inside the IT organization, and I think it's a real bottleneck to us actually getting anything done, because if everything has to be specified up front, how can you really be agile? So you've got to find a better way. And he gives a really good example of looking at project risk. If I have a project that's value at risk is about $1 million, and it's this big project and it's amorphous and I don't really understand it very well, the risk that it's going to fail is probably high. Let's just say it's 30%, so I'm risking 300,000. Let's say if I then break it down into two projects, a smaller chunk, it's a little bit more manageable, I can understand it a bit better, I can get my head around it. So the risk, for sake of easy numbers, drops down to 15%. So now I've only got project A and project B, they're both risking 750,000. Sorry, 75,000K. So my risk has dropped down to 150K. If I then drop it down to, so let's say I'm going to have some small projects, some really small, 6 small projects. Now, I am actually spending a little bit more money at this point. I've broken it down into 6 smaller projects, but my risk, what I'm actually putting at risk has dropped right down. I've gone from risking 300,000 and having a 30% chance of failure to try and get it down to a 6% chance of failure in each one of these projects, and I'm only risking 60K. This is the kind of language that if you can start to sell this to your CFO, hey, if I get it down, if I focus on smaller projects, if I focus on smaller batch size, if I apply lean thinking, I can get the stuff through my supply chain, and it's a lot less risky. Now, it might be that 5 of those projects are a lower risk, and 1 might be a higher risk, because that might be the area that you don't know as much about. But that's, at least I can get started and I can get on with the 5 projects that are clear, they're well defined. Yeah, I've got to build a customer registration, and I've got to build a checkout page, and I've got to build this. Well, they're sort of solved problems. They're known. I can get on with that. And the risky bit is the project that's got the secret sauce or this really cool thing that I'm doing. Well, okay, then I can have a team that's going to focus on that. It's about controlling and management risk, and that's a lot of what Lean starts to tell us about. So, measurement. Okay, you'll see in some versions of the CALMS model, the M in CALMS, some people will say it's metrics, which is okay. Some people will say it's monitoring. Not quite. I think it's important to conceptualize this as being measurement or metrics. There's a couple of reasons for that. If we take the traditional view, if it was monitoring, don't get me wrong, really, really important. If we look at the Puppet Labs 2014 State of DevOps Report, which I urge you to read every year, there's some really good stats in there for again, to take it out to your bosses and try and convince them that DevOps is a really good idea. They're trying to, they've drafted in Nicole Forsgren, who's an academic from a university in Texas, I think, to try and improve the robustness of the stats, and I think they probably need to. But one of the things that they make of the top 5 predictors of IT performance organization as a whole, number 3 was proactive monitoring. So, proactive monitoring is a really, really key indicator. If you're the type of organization that does proactive monitoring, then you're more likely to be a successful IT organization for the ideas that are listed on the slide. But, for us, monitoring, we always think about stuff like, our elk stack dashboards, and we think about cool stuff like App Dynamics and all of these APM tools, and they're all focused on business metrics. And the reason that I would say, as I like the M to be metrics or measurement and not just monitoring, is because we've got to think about business value as well. This is a traditional, what's called a balanced scorecard, which says, when I'm looking at success, I need to think about it from what the customer's perspective is. I need to think about the financial metrics, like net present value or share price or profitability or gross sales or whatever those financial metrics. Customer metrics, I've got to look at like things like net promoter score or customer feedback or the number of complaints or the number of retweets or whatever things it might be. Internal processes, I'm looking at my efficiency. I'm looking at all that cycle time stuff. I'm looking at how well and how efficient I'm being internally. And again, if I'm talking about learning and growth, I'm looking at those cultural things. I'm looking at how I'm investing in people. How much money am I spending on training? You might argue that something like staff turnover might fall into that area as well. How well am I doing in managing and being promoting my people? Because people are critically important to the success of my business. So the point I'm making here is that when you think about the M in the DevOps CALMS model, try and widen your scope beyond just the traditional IT infrastructure metrics or application management metrics. Try and think about how I can get a customer perspective, an internal perspective, a finance perspective. So last but not least in the CALMS model is sharing. I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm doing okay because I've only got 3 slides left. Sharing. So one of the most important elements of sharing is effective communication. And there's a really good model here, which I use a lot, and they talk about this band of effective communication. And just like to give you, to give you an example, so we're going from left, up and down, from face-to-face communication to sort of interactive phone video conferencing to memos to just general bulletins. So if the reason they're sort of making this point that, overly rich communication, for example, causes confusion. If you had the CEO you had a one-to-one meeting with you, and he's explaining that there's some changes to the parking regulations and the use of the company car park, you would be looking at him like, you would be completely confused. It's utterly irrelevant. Why am I having a meeting with the CEO to talk about changes to the company car park? I mean, it's crazy. So, if that's just a little routine change that would be easily handled, a routine change that would easily be handled by an email bulletin. That said, if you come in the morning and you have a general email to everybody saying, "Hi guys, we've just been sold to Amazon," you would be going, hello, that's not a very effective communication. I'm worried about my job. What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my pension? What does it mean for the company? Am I going to have to relocate? So that sort of big disruptive change needs that face-to-face, that one-to-one, needs the town hall meeting. It needs a really, really planned series of communications. So if we take this across all of the things that we do on a daily basis, if you're trying to communicate and share something that is complex, then do it face-to-face. You do it in an interactive setting. Do it in a video conference or a Skype chat where people can see your face. If you're just firing off a piece of information and somebody says, what's the name of server X, Y, and Z, or what's the URL to the Logstash, the Kibana dashboard, or what's the password for this, yeah, sure, just fire that into Slack or fire that into HipChat and give them the information. It's effectively context-free. But if you're trying to communicate rich ideas and you're trying to share, you're trying to talk with junior developers, you're trying to do code reviews, you're trying to grow and develop them, then make sure that those complex stuff is communicated through this band of effective communication. So the kind of channels that we can have, from the informal through to the formal, I mean, it's huge. I mean, we're so, so rich at the moment. I mean, my company, we use Slack as our chat channel, and I pretty much live in Slack these days. It enables me, we have automated stuff feeding into the Slack channel, so status of build, status of deployments, all this stuff's coming into Slack. Status of Jira tickets is coming into Slack. Status of commits into the GitHub. Stash is coming in Slack. So Slack becomes my tool, just seeing, well, what's going on? What's the activity? What are people talking about? We have a Slack channel internally for each customer. We have a Slack channel externally with the customer. So if the customer has a question and wants to understand what's going on, they can just hop into the Slack channel and ask us a question. Likewise, our commits and our Jira ticket changes go into the customer Slack channel as well. So they can see what we're doing and how we're communicating. And they get a sense of we're not just these abstract guys sat there and, in some cases in another country, because we have customers in the US, who are sat there doing nothing. So, sometimes people ask, well, which one of these should I have? Which one of these are really important? And the answer is you need all of them. You've got to have that range. You've got to have that band of effective communication, which means that you need to have all of these channels available to you. So, you need to have those radiator screens up on the wall. You've got to have good video chat for informal chat. Sometimes you need to have really good video conferencing for shared chat. And, and you need to have intranets. You need to have communities of practices. I mean, we use Confluence for our wiki and stuff like that. And the only one on there that I would say is maybe optional is having a document management repository. But if you're in a very, very large organization that is still addicted to Word format documents, they're a cancer, along with projects and along with multitasking. These are three cancers that are affecting every organization we work with. They're a DevOps, I would say Word and Excel and PowerPoint are a DevOps anti-pattern. Try and get rid of them and try and focus on getting a lot more stuff in a way that is better to shared and better to collaborate in. And that's basically it. I've run out of time and also I've run out of slides. So thanks very much for your time. If you've got any questions, fire away.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have 10 minutes break because it's...
I used up all the question time.
We don't have time to question.
Sorry. Does anybody have any questions?
If so, two questions.
Hi, you talk about no projects, but the business usually thinks in terms of, return on investment, in terms of costs, in terms of accountability, in terms of business value. So how do you resolve those two needs?
It's a good question, and I'm honestly going to say I don't have the answer, and I don't think anybody does yet. The number one thing we're trying to do is just get them to reduce the size of the project down. Like try and make a project that's no bigger than a month or two, and try and get the project size way down. The best way, if you can, is to move the funding model from being funding projects to funding teams. So if you could have that discussion with things, so okay, over the past 3 years, you've basically had 3 full-time development teams, okay, 3 full-time sprint teams, for example, or multidisciplinary DevOps teams. So all of those have been funded continually on projects and projects and projects and projects, and maybe there's been a little bit of flex for contractors. But why don't you just say, hey, we're going to have 3 full-time Scrum teams for the next 5 years or 3 years. Just fund that. Okay, so that's my cost base. That is what it is, and maybe we put a little bit of contingency budget in for contractors. Then say, well, what's the most important thing that the business wants us to do? Let's map some of that stuff out, and then let's break that down into the smallest piece of work that delivers the maximum amount of value, and we'll get started on doing that now. Because we know that in 6 months' time, you're going to change things. So having a roadmap that extends much past about 6 months is probably a waste of everybody's time. So the biggest shift is probably to move from funding projects to funding teams. That would be the number one thing that I'd say that you could do. And try and have a conversation with a business to say, what is it that if we're saying we're going to fund these 3 teams and the cost of funding those 3 teams is £1.5 million over, per year, if you're investing that, what's the return that you want to see? Okay? How much business value would you like us to add to the business value over that time? And they might say, well, actually, a return on investment of 1x, 2x, 5x, it might only be 30%. Most things have an internal hurdle rate around 30% mark. And so saying, well, so over that time, you only want us to increase revenue or increase profit or increase customer thing on the website by a 30% or something like that. Well, actually, we think we can do that. That's a pretty low-hanging fruit, to be brutally honest. If you're working in an e-commerce environment. So does that sort of answer your question? It's not a fixed problem solution yet. And if anybody has any ideas and wants to collaborate on trying to work on it, I really think that if we can crack that problem, we'll have a big win. Okay?
Thank
you.
If
anybody has any questions, just come and grab me afterwards, because I think a lot of you need coffee.
Okay, 5 minutes break.